I really have shifted most of my time and energy to taking all of the things that I've developed and learned through the years, including raising 4 children. That teaches you a lot. I've published on the leadership development capacities you actually develop by being a mother. I've published books on various elements, taking all that actually, and Valerie was saying she was feeling old. I'm kind of in that, we're feeling old stage in my 60s, and decided where to focus really much of my energy. And that really is taking research, taking all of the pieces and targeting all my head, heart, and hands into actually seeing shifts within the state of Utah. And so I did in 2022, I'm a restless soul anyway. I was extra restless in late 2022 and thought, with the work I've been doing for a long time in Utah, I've been doing this over 15, 16 years now, in addition to global stuff, the needle's not moving in a lot of areas. And so do I keep doing this, or do I spend more time in Hawaii on the beach? I work a lot of hours. And really, in late 2022, really read a book. I'm a scholar of women's leadership, but also of societal change and organization development and change. And so I actually read a book that transformed me. But let me give you a little bit of background on Utah. So what we know is in the state of Utah, national and statewide studies continue to tell us that girls and women are not thriving in critical areas. And so year after year, Utah continues to have high levels of domestic violence, sexual assault, child sexual abuse, and gender-based discrimination. In fact, we're 6th worst in the nation right now for rape and sexual assault. 1 in 7 children in the state of Utah will be sexually abused. We don't have time right now to talk about some of the reasons when you get into religious societies and conservative. And by the way, I'm an active, very committed member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and very much use my energy and influence to try and lead change. It's not just my church, but more religious societies in general have some of the same trends. We are also, for those of you in Utah know from the press, we have the Wallet Hub designation as the worst state for women's equality in the United States, year after year after year. And people can dismiss it here and there, but we do have the worst pay gap. We have various kinds of things. Okay, I have research up the yin-yang all day long. I could tell you about that. And we also have low levels of women's leadership. And when you have low levels of women's leadership, other things just are targeted. There's so much research around this. And although the needle has moved slightly, and I have been leading work to do research to elevate this. So I'm a scholar, do lots of research to elevate each of these things. Really started in the women's leadership and have been pulled into pretty much all women's work. So we have reports on domestic violence and sexual assault, on entrepreneurship and the pay gap, on leadership development, on education, all of the different topics, because they all relate to each other. Everything. I mean, that's what you found, Valerie, in your research. Everything relates. When you have experienced violence, it impacts everything in your life, right? And many of you in the room have researched or experienced or are connected on that topic. Although the needle has moved slightly, very slightly, can I just say, in a few areas. One of the things, I used to be in some scholarly groups where we did some things at the United Nations level on looking at trends. Like, how long would it take for us to get parity in this or this? For the first time, as a scholar that knows probably more than anyone in the state of Utah on the women's front of research, I took that and really started looking at how we did trajectories. And it came to me very strongly that if we keep doing the pieces and parts we're doing the way we're doing them, it's going to take 30 to 40 years to make notable progress. And as a mother of 4 and as a grandmother of 6, my youngest granddaughter is 1 and just took her a few steps last weekend, and I was a witness to it. I was in the room. It was such a delight. But when I think of her, and I think of 3 to 4 decades to make notable progress, that's not acceptable. That is not acceptable. We have to create change faster. Now, I don't have too much time left, but I'm going to give you the overview, and I have some Boulder Way Forward cards. But I will tell you that if we're serious about ensuring that Utah girls and women thrive, we need to create change much faster. So we launched the Boulder Way Forward. I started at the end of 2022. Was really inspired by this particular book. 2 flights to Costa Rica, 2 flights back, read the book. By the time I landed, by the way, I am a spiritual person. I get some of my best inspiration on airplanes where I'm trapped in a seat and I journal. I utilize that and I prepare to get some good reflection during those times. When I landed, I knew what the name was. I knew what we were supposed to do. And about 6 weeks and talking to about 100 people, just decided to lean in. And so that was 2023, 7 years. Let's shift in ways that we haven't in the state of Utah. Really a shift from just doing stuff to really outcomes. So not just doing stuff. And I'll tell you that this book transformed me. I won't get into the details, but it really, really helped bring together the things that we were doing. The bottom line, and I was trained in my doctoral work on systems thinking, is that actually in the state of Utah, we're doing lots of stuff, lots of important stuff. We have things for girls and women. We're doing pieces and parts, but we're not shifting. And so what can we do different to shift, even with things going? Really, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so really, this model was in my head when I landed, and it looks complex. I'm not going to go through it. But on the ground, and it's a great model, this systems thinking really is that there are pieces and parts, and it's great to have that, but we're not moving together as a system. We're just doing stuff. I say to leaders, and right now we have, at our 1-year mark, we have about 3,000 people in Utah engaged, about 300 organizations. It's already grown. We are looking at the end of year 2 to have about 10,000 people engaged, about 1,000 organizations, and so forth. And generally speaking, what came really in this model was, if for Savannah, my 1-year-old granddaughter, if we just take, and I had a couple of people tell me this right at the first, why don't you just choose one of these 18 spokes? We call it in the wheel. You can watch a longer video of me. I'm like, okay, one spoke, which one? And then when my granddaughter's 8, let's choose a different one, and then she's 50 and we're still going? Are you following me? So this is not starting from scratch. This is taking what's being done already and pulling them together. For instance, Health Across the Lifespan. Can you see those very well? That is being anchored. That's our biggest spoke. That is being anchored by Intermountain Health, University of Utah Health, and Regents Blue Cross Blue Shields. If you look over at child sexual abuse, the Maloof Foundation, SAPRIA, Prevent Child Abuse, Utah, the people doing the work already. It's a lot of work, actually. But you can't just choose one because finance relates to every single one. Does that make sense? I mean, it relates directly to domestic violence. It relates to education. It relates to entrepreneurship. Finances relates to legal elements in the legislature and the allocations that are out there. You can see we have various things from the pay gap to political representation. What we've been doing this first year is pulling together partners. Lots and lots of partners. We're just now moving, and it'll take me about another week or two. I'm an early riser. I started at 3 this morning to get to the point with some staff. and I have a few staff. Thank heavens for a good male ally, Scott Anderson, who was the CEO of Zions Bank, went to bat at the legislature, not this year, that would have been tough, last year, to get some funding for a few more staff. But generally speaking, what this is, and I know my time's about gone, is a way to take research, to take passions, and to take your hands, head, heart, and hands, right? And figure out how to do this. So we actually have 18 spokes. We have 12 impact teams on the rims. Under identity, we have like refugees. We have LGBTQ, race and ethnicity. We have many things like that. But also, as of May of this year, we have 29 counties in the state of Utah, and we have coalitions set up in 29 counties. Thank you. So they're making their way. There's a lot to this. It's complex. But if you have 1 in 7 kids that experience sexual abuse, this is not going to work unless it gets where? It has to get to counties, cities, congregations, schools. Are you following me? It has to get to every home. And so that is the goal in 7 years. We've been building the foundation, building the leaders. I have about 200 leaders now in the movement, and we're getting close to about 4,000 people now. But it will take a lot more than that. So I just given you, this is a way to bridge, right? That's one of our topics, to bridge, bring partners together. Even though mine is very local in the state of Utah, I think it provides an opportunity. Nobody else has done this. Nobody else. I have states calling already, and actually a couple African countries. I used to speak a lot all around the world that are like, we're hearing about this. What's going on? I'm like, give me a couple more years. Let's just see what's happening here. But what two more slides. Grassroots, it has to get down to the grassroots. So I've been able to present to, and we haven't opened the doors yet, even cities and towns, how they can be part of Boulder Way Forward. Women's groups, we've already worked with every women's group in the state. There's about 180. Counties, impact teams, companies, campuses, and so forth to really get the work done. So, where's the... It's not, there. So again, you can find out more information. I have some cards over here, but it's just an interesting example. And even this morning, I probably had 10 more people reach out directly to me. How do I get involved? And I will tell you very bluntly here that we have amazing women in this state. First of all, they don't know they're amazing, most of them. And second, they know that they're prepared to help. A lot of them have stayed at home with kids, but they're like, I don't know what to do with my energy and time. And it's like, you are prepared to lead no matter what your experience is. And you can feel called like I do. The only reason I do this, I'm not paid for most of it. I am a professor and I teach, but I feel personally called by God. And that is the only reason I lean in to do the work I do. And I have published on calling. You don't have to be religious to feel called. I've written chapters. You just are, and the people that have been panelists are the same. You feel that calling. You feel that pull that this is the work that only you need to do, actually. Your brain, your heart, and your hands can do that. We have to do better in Utah. I love being a woman. I love living in Utah. I really, really do. But there are things amiss. There are things amiss in every state. But when you have more conservative religious, you have more sexism and some of the issues that we're talking about. But I don't want people to, wherever I go in the world, they say, oh, you're in Utah. Like, oh, pretty mountains, good skiing, but oh, it's so sad for women, right? I don't want that. Our vision is not to lift girls and women at the expense of boys and men. That's the scarcity mentality. We just believe that in the abundance mentality. And I'll tell you, there's men coming on. They want a better place for them. When we strengthen the impact of Utah girls and women, we do strengthen everyone. And a last little thought. When I fly in from the east, I love coming over the Utah mountains, coming in from the east because you can see some snow most of the year. Most of the time when I'm landing at the airport, the person next to me does that. Oh, you're trying to do work with women in Utah? And my goal really has been in my mind, this vision, that in 2030, and definitely by the Olympics that's going to be here, that people, I'll fly in, they'll look at these beautiful mountains, and instead of saying that, they will say, I want to ski in those mountains. They'll say that, but then they'll say, I have heard amazing things about women in Utah. I am excited to meet women in Utah. And so that's not only why we're doing this, we need a better place for girls and women and their families. And that's an example of what we're doing here in the state of Utah. Thank you so much.
As they said, my name is Julia Schiwal. I am a program officer at the United States Institute of Peace. For those of you that don't know our institution, the U.S. Institute of Peace was founded by an act of Congress and President Ronald Reagan in 1984 to respond to the deep public demand and need for an institution that would be independent and nonpartisan to work for peace and on the art of peace in the same exact way that our colleagues in the Department of Defense and at West Point work on war and the art of war. Since the founding of our nation, there has been calls for a peace institute. Famously, George Washington, who designed the idea of an Academy of War with West Point, also sought to, in his personal diaries, someday create an institution of peace. That vision was not realized until about 200 years after our nation's founding in 1984. And the people who founded the U.S. Institute of Peace were not politicians, they were not congressional leaders, they were everyday Americans who went to peace churches, who marched against the Vietnam War and the draft, who demanded that their political leadership provide them an institution that would be part of the U.S. government, that would, regardless of the conflict, regardless of where we were working in the world, work for peace. The way we think about peace is the mitigation, prevention, and resolution of deadly conflict. We work in 26 countries around the world, including in some of the most present and active conflicts such as Ukraine, and in long-running conflicts that had deep American involvement, such as Vietnam or Afghanistan. I work on the religion team at the Institute. The religion team is the oldest thematic team at the Institute because religious communities were vital to the founding of the United States Institute of Peace, because religious communities and their moral call for peace animated political leaders to create an institution that would work for peace at that simple, basic moral level. So since day one, the United States Institute of Peace has sought to fulfill that public mission and continue working with religion all around the world. We did have a colleague from the IRF office speaking earlier today. A little humble brag, the U.S. Institute of Peace's religion team is the oldest active office in the United States federal government working on religion. Many of our companion offices were founded immediately after the events of 9/11 in January 2001, but our team was working on religion since 1984, and that gave us tremendous respect and legitimacy with religious partners around the world. So what do we do with the religion team at the U.S. Institute of Peace? Well, the first thing that we do is we teach people about religion. We serve as experts who can advise the United States government on how religion is affecting peace and conflict all around the world. To give you an example of the type of work that I've done, I was originally brought onto the Institute to advise the U.S. government on the Taliban during the U.S. intra-Afghan negotiations with the Taliban under the Trump administration. There are a lot of ideas about who the Taliban are and what they want. There are a lot of ideas about why they take the stances they do on women's rights. Valerie mentioned this, but we did speak in the break, and one of the key points that I made again and again to United States government partners of both parties at the political appointee level, in Congress and in the American public, when answering the question of why the Taliban believe what they believe about women's rights, is that for the Taliban, many of their members of whom are very uneducated, illiterate, from poor rural communities, they know women's rights as the thing that came with drones and B-52s. For many women in Afghanistan outside of the major cities of Kabul, the U.S. intervention did not bring rights. It didn't change anything. It brought night raids, and it brought the fear of violence. For many women in Afghanistan, the US intervention and the international coalition that moved to defeat al-Qaeda and the Taliban did bring rights, and it did bring quotas in the government to advance women's rights in the country. But that was not true across the board. And for people coming in from religious communities, rural communities, who are poor, deeply underserved, and have for decades, since 1842, been in conflict with first the British Empire, and then the Soviet Union, and then the United States and our allies, they have no appetite to discuss rights because they view us as enemies. The reality is we also view them as enemies. But that's exactly why USIP exists, to help bridge that specific religious divide, the divide between our government and the individuals that we're fighting around the world. The reality is that you do not make peace with your allies, you make peace with your enemies. That is the biggest barrier that we face in our mission, because oftentimes people turn to us for expertise and advice, and they would like for a way to disarm their enemies, not through violent conflict, but through political victory. But that's not what peace is. Peace is both sides looking for ways to settle a violent conflict, not through peace as a political goal to achieve something else, but for peace itself as the political goal. And that's the work we do under both the Trump administration and the Biden administration, as we're nonpartisan. The second type of work we do after teaching about religion is engaging on religion. One of the missions that I lead is the United States Afghan Consultative Mechanism, which is a US government, essentially just small little meeting room like this, where we bring together Afghan women leaders and religious scholars who oppose the Taliban to help US government leaders understand the on-the-ground situation in Afghanistan today. We bring expert religious scholars who oppose Taliban together with American leaders in Congress and in the Department of State and in USAID with Afghan women leaders to talk through policy that is evolving on Afghanistan. We bring in religious leaders to engage rather than excluding them from the conversation. There are many religious leaders who deeply oppose the Taliban. And immediately after the collapse of the Afghan government, Afghan women who had fought for their rights had a real come to Jesus moment, as you could put it, even if that's inappropriate for the context. They had ignored religious leaders since 2001. They felt they didn't need them. And so when the Taliban rose to power, there were not good relationships between the many, many Islamic scholars, men and women, Shia and Sunni, who opposed the Taliban interpretation of Islam. And so we've been working since then to build strong relationships between Afghan women's rights activists and the religious community to better advocate together against the Taliban's policies. The third type of work that we do is leadership. I was in Bosnia and Sarajevo last week for a conference all about moving past the Dayton Accords. For those of you that don't know, the Dayton Accords are an inter-ethnic power-sharing agreement that have kept religious and ethnic tensions in Bosnia-Herzegovina at bay and in frozen status since the 1990s. The fact is, however, a peace treaty that freezes ethnic conflict is not a liberal democracy, and it is not something that allows Bosnia-Herzegovina to develop, enter the United Nations, enter the European Union, and join NATO, which is what their political ambitions are. And so they are taking the very courageous and dangerous steps forward to move out of a peace agreement and into a political process, which is precisely the type of work that we've done before in the context of Afghanistan, moving from active conflict or frozen conflict to a constitutional political order. And so right now, the U.S. Institute of Peace is working on efforts to support our colleagues in Bosnia and Herzegovina to get to that next step. There's a lot of different ways we can think about religious divides, but mostly in our work, we don't actually deal that often and that deeply with divides between religious and ethnic communities. The biggest divides that we encounter are divides between secular people who have a lot of difficulty understanding religious communities, and religious communities themselves who have deep, long-standing political disagreements over rights and contexts. And the work that we do is try to advance those very difficult conversations in the face of tremendous difficulties and opposition all around the world. Our main mission is to embody the heritage ideals and the concerns of the American people for peace all around the world. That heritage is rich and it is complicated. It is the heritage of the state of Utah, which has peace treaties with the Navajo tribe. It is the heritage of the state of Montana, which famously had Jeanette Rankin become the first U.S. women's senator, and she is also the only senator that voted against World War II and one of several senators that voted against World War I. That heritage of peace is also the protests in the Vietnam War and those people and individuals who did not protest the war but protested the draft. The ideals of the American people are well known around the world. When I was in Sarajevo last week, one of the most interesting topics of conversation was an Islamic scholar who greatly complimented the Tom Hanks movie Bridge of Spies because he thought it was quite funny that a society would give a fair trial to an enemy. And the concerns of the American people are also of great concern to me and all of my colleagues at the Institute. I have a twin sister who's a school teacher in Montana, and when there are fears of war, for example, a few years ago there was a great scare over a conflict with Iran, she texted me and asked me, "Julia, are we going to go to war with Iran?" And I gave her the answer best I could from a nonpartisan and independent perspective. That independent perspective and that independent mission of the Institute is the most vital part of our mission because it's as independent as all of the great American people and the great diversity and richness and perspectives on peace that we have in this country. We have great, rich debates on peace and war and conflict, and many perspectives, from one perspective that sees peace as coming through strength, and another perspective, like the perspective shared here today, that peace is coming through bridging our religious divides. We engage the breadth and depth of those perspectives to advance the United States' abilities to engage in the peaceful resolution of conflict all around the world. Thank you.
So good afternoon, all. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you to Utah Global Diplomacy for inviting me here and including me in this conversation. At the U.S. Baha'i Office of Public Affairs, I'm the Human Rights Officer. And my role there is to advocate for religious freedom for persecuted Baha'i communities all over the world, especially in Iran and Yemen, where they face severe persecution. A little bit about the Baha'i faith. The Baha'i faith is a global independent religion that basically teaches and try to urge unity. This is my son there. I want to thank my husband there for helping me out with the kids today. That teaches that society needs to be unified. And there's a few principles that really embody the teaching of the Baha'i faith. I want to mention today is the equality between men and women. There's principles regarding universal education, principle regarding the elimination of discrimination of all kinds. And the gist of the Baha'i community, as I said, is to engage in service to one's community. Engage in service through working with youth, engage in service through working with the children, especially empower the youth to see opportunities to serve their communities, identify a problem, and figure out ways on their own to solve these issues, because we believe that the youth have this unique talent and skill to create these unique solutions to current problems. So we work with youth, we work with community, we offer space for peace and healing. And in most countries, these principles, these activities are welcome, they're encouraged. But in countries like Iran and Yemen, Baha'is are persecuted because of these beliefs. It might seem alien to us, but in these countries, because when I read the charging offenses, it says membership in the Baha'i community as your charge to being persecuted. And currently there are about 300,000 Baha'is in Iran, and about maybe between 70 and 90 currently incarcerated, and 2/3 of them are women. And we learned recently that the Iranian government are specifically targeting the women because of their, I guess, leadership in our community. I want to just highlight a few of the principles. I mean, there's religious scriptures that teaches us. I'm a third-generation Baha'i from Guyana. I've been living in the United States most of my life, though. But I saw growing up women in leadership in the Baha'i community. And there's specific text that says, for example, when in the future, and this is religious principles in scripture, women will be so involved in the highest positions of leadership, and only then will the world see betterment. There's one particular quote that I cherish a lot and I teach my boys, is that if we consider men and women as two wings of a bird, one wing being a male, the other being a female, not until both wings are equally developed will the world of humanity take flight. And should one wing remain weak, flight is impossible. So you want to think about how do we find ways to ensure that both men and women equally achieve their fullest potential, and also says that until the reality of equality between men and women is fully established and attained, the highest social development of mankind is not possible. It's not if it's possible, it's not possible. So for 8 million Baha'is around the world, these are principles that they're learning from an early age, and they're working towards avenues to make this into reality. And in terms of the destiny of women, we know through the Baha'i writings that women is going to enter all branches of government and politics, and they're going to be the ones that will eliminate warfare. And if you think about, the creator of the universe telling us all these in the 19th century, which to me kind of foreshadowed the research we just saw from Miss Hudson. Imagine in the 19th century, all this was, predestined through religious scriptures, and we've seen it manifest today. So I very much appreciate that particular work, and I look forward to receiving the slides to share with my friends. So these are the principles that embody the Baha'i teachings, and these are the principles that Baha'i women in Iran espouses, and they're being persecuted because of this. There's a quote I heard once that really brought home the reality of the Baha'i community in Iran, is that Baha'is are persecuted from the cradle to the grave, right? Baha'i women, as I mentioned, they're being targeted. Baha'i youth cannot engage in, are banned from higher education. Baha'i children are harassed in school. Baha'is cannot enter certain careers, anything that's high level, they're banned from those careers. Baha'i cemeteries are decimated, their homes are destroyed. Like, if you think about every single avenue of life, they're facing persecution. Earlier this year, Human Rights Watch issued a report called The Boot on My Neck that basically concluded that the treatment of the Baha'i community for the past 43 years amounts to crime against humanity, because there's no aspect of their lives where they don't face persecution. But what keeps me motivated is, because I read these stories every day and I cry sometimes, and my husband is there to pick me up off the floor, is the fact that even though they face persecution, the reaction to the persecution is something that marvels me up to today. The Baha'is continue to practice their faith freely because it is a human right. No one's going to take this right away from me. I'm going to continue to serve my community. I'm going to continue to engage my fellow religious community, even though I know that I might be sentenced to 10 years in prison. I might be sentenced to 5 years in prison. I might be called to, I might be arrested and then sent home, and then 5 years after, I'm called to serve my prison sentence. So in actuality, I'm 10 years of stagnation because I don't know when I'm going to be called or not. But even though this reality is known, they still continue to practice their faith, and that keeps me motivated. And also, the international Baha'i community, because in these societies where if you speak, if you practice, you might be sentenced to prison, it takes all of us to uplift their voices, all of us to seek advocacy on their behalf. Last year, the Baha'i international community launched a campaign called the Our Stories One campaign. And this campaign commemorated the lives of 10 Baha'i women who were executed on June 18, 1983. And they were executed because they were Baha'is. They were executed because they were Baha'i teachers. They were nurses. They were veterinary students. The youngest was 17 years old, Mona. The eldest was 57 years old. And these women, their homes were raided. They were placed in prison, and for about a couple months, they were placed in solitary confinement. They were being forced to recant their faith. And none of them, they stood resolutely, and none of them recanted their faith. And I want to just read a few of the statistics regarding these women, because I just find their strength so, beyond our reality. Mona was 17 years old. And how it happened, on June 18th, they were all taken from prison. They were in a market square, and they were hung one after the other in each other's presence. And they all stood resolutely, and they knew death was coming, and they still decided to uphold freedom of religion and belief and accept that fate. So the Our Stories One campaign honors their strength, and it honors the fight for freedom for women across Iran. Because as the hashtag says, our story is one. The pain and suffering that women face all over the world is a similar type of struggle. So we want to honor their strength. I also want to say that we're all a part of this together. Unless we find solutions together, we're all going to suffer. Because when they were executed, Baha'i women were being targeted. Now in 2023, the entire Iranian population, women are being targeted. So if we fail to address issues, it just continues to bubble over, and we see the impact today. A couple of these women, and I find their strength so amazing. One woman, Ezrat Esrahi, her daughter was hung on the same day. See, imagine seeing that and accepting your faith. Her husband was executed 2 days prior, and a few of these women also, their husbands or their sons were also executed a couple of days prior. And knowing that, they still say, you know what, I believe so deeply in religious freedom that I'm going to show strength. And so I think it's for all of us to ensure that the history, the stories of these women remain in the public sphere, and we learn from them. I'll also mention Mavash Sebat and Fariba Kalmabadi. These are Baha'i women in Iran who are currently serving a second 10-year prison sentence because of their belief and because of their faith. So if they're forced to live out this sentence, they will be serving a combined 40-year prison sentence simply because of their faith, simply for upholding their basic human right for freedom of religion or belief. And even in their current incarceration, Mavash Sabet, she continues to write, and recently we received a letter, and she's writing about her experience, and she's telling women to stay strong and all these things, knowing fully well that she might be placed in solitary confinement. So that's a strength that keeps me going, knowing that you might spend 20 years in prison, but you still find opportunities to serve humanity and speak out for religious freedom. And also, I add this case in the presentation just to show the nature of the intense persecution. This woman here, her body was very sad. Her name, Shamsi Khanum, she passed away. The Iranian government, the prosecutor's office, exhumed her body. And the family, someone called them, and they found her body on the side of the road. So even in death, she was not respected, simply because of her faith. Think about that. Simply for upholding your human right, you're not, you experience persecution. But the Our Story is One campaign, the resilience, the strength that's shown, continues to inspire me. I have to move closer to read this slide because my eyes are getting bad. I'm getting old. But if you see, because when society rise up and defend people, then the Iranian government try to counter that, and it counters that through hate speech, right? So if you see that when the Our Stories One campaign was picking up steam on social media, Instagram, and even people making videos and all these things, the anti-hate Baha'i propaganda rose drastically. I don't know if I could, you guys are seeing that, right? Towards the end, Our Stories One campaign, anti-Baha'i boot campaign rose as the Our Stories One campaign picked up steam. And we saw a huge spike in the propaganda to the point that in a day, there's over a couple thousand, 10,000 or so anti-hate propaganda that's flood social media just to suppress the truth and to paint a picture that's untrue about the Baha'i community. But also what was interesting is that the impressions that we saw across social media, the public reaction, was so high that it spiked during the Our Stories One campaign. So even though there was so much hate propaganda, society knew and they understood that, you know what, it's wrong for you to persecute people because of their faith. And so we're going to we're going to share, we're going to retweet the story of these 10 women, and we're going to retweet and share all of the wonderful things that were happening regarding regarding the campaign. And one of the acts for the campaign was for regular people, everybody, to create art and music that showcase the persecution of the resilience of these women. And we saw, for example, artistic showcases in, I can't see, but you guys can see. I'm just going to go through the slides. Artistic campaigns, music, art that really celebrated the lives of these women, honor their strength. Because me and my husband, we speak about this, like, what would you have done if, you know, you knew death was coming and you had to recant your faith to save your life? How, like, really, would you be able to stand firm and uphold that? And I think that in these moments, something happens to all of us, and we decide, you know what, to protect not just, I'm not going to think about my life, I'm thinking about the future. I'm going to uphold that right for everybody else. And so we saw music, concerts, we saw proclamations, all these things in response to Your Story is One campaign. And I don't think I could press the thing there, but there's a wonderful music video from Nigeria of this local talent singing about Our Story is One and how the movement to liberate women is an unstoppable movement. A male artist singing that, and it was so inspiring. I wish I could have showed a clip, but I guess we could share the slides. But I guess in general, it shows that even in the face of persecution, we could find creative ways to stand up for ourselves and stand up for each other, and to show that we are not going to allow hate and, I guess, bad tradition to keep women suppressed. Because, and I believe, according to our scripture, unless women are emancipated, the social progress of humanity will never see the light of day. And so we're not just fighting for women, we're fighting for the entire society.
Okay, now the fun part, wrapping this whole day together in a great big bow that somehow feels palatable, actionable, and most of all, hopeful. So the stories that were shared here, let's just review where we've come. We've been on a long journey together, and it's been a glorious one. Susan, thank you for illustrating the power of local impact and local vision. Boulder Way Forward is tangible. It's got all the elements of a SMART goal, and you're going to achieve this goal. I know this because I know Susan, but also because I know every woman in this room, and I know the power of Utah women. I'm excited to be on that flight back to Utah and brag about what you achieve in that initiative. Thank you for sharing your vision. Julia, thank you for teaching us about the United States Institute of Peace and what it is doing as an effective institution. I love how you talked about the art of peace. It is an art. There are a lot of things we can know in our heads. We've learned a lot of those things from our academic and research experts in the room. There's a lot of things that come, though, from practicing the art of peace. And I think you've alluded to that, right? Even in your experiences in Bosnia, you're talking about some of these artistic moments. You can't know in your head, you have to feel them in your heart and lean into those moments. And Tschika, bringing it home by reminding us that religion is part of the resilience equation, especially when religion is threatened, especially when people we know and love from your very community are being killed for their faith, are being targeted for their faith. How do we bring this all back to resilience? I'm going to start with a question I want each of you to reflect on, which is maybe in relationship to your work or in relationship to what you've heard today, the thing that's driving you forward. What is your personal source of resilience? I know every single one of you has experienced sexism. I know every single one of you has come up against other barriers. Race, age, maybe a barrier because you say you're from the state of Utah. Maybe a barrier because you're trying to forge a new path forward, a bolder way forward. Can you just share some personal reflections on where your resiliency comes from? And we'll go in reverse order, starting with Tschika.
Thank you very much. I mentioned this just now, but seeing the strength of women who are persecuted tells me that I don't have the option to not have that strength as well, to do what I can to ensure that women's rights are upheld and we create a society where we all benefit. I hold deeply that each individual person has something unique to bring to the planet, and when they're not able to fully develop themselves, we all lose as a group. So I'm trying everything I can from now until, God brings me home, to ensure that as much as I can, to allow people to develop to their fullest capacities. Because I know for sure, not an if or a guess, that if that doesn't happen, we lose as a group that contribution forever and ever and ever. They're never gonna come back to this earth. So all the women who are stuck in prison, we as a group are losing those unique talents, and we're all suffering for that. So my resilience comes from not having the luxury to not move the needle forward as much as I can.
When I was in Sarajevo recently, a woman leader who works on religion and education told me about a problem they had. Immediately after the war, there was a great demand to get students back into high school and learning. And so, for political expediency, they created a high school system across the country, and for many of those high schools, 56 of them, they created a segregated high school system that segregates religious and ethnic communities. Almost 30 years later, those schools still exist. They were meant to be phased out. And now the problem is to the point where in many rural communities, people can physically not build a bridge across a river because they are too afraid that if they build the bridge, it will be used by the other group and by young people of that other group to attack the other. That, to me, is a huge failure. Somebody should have fixed that. But the reason why it was never fixed is because this high school system was set up. There was no plan to create a federal ministry of education for Bosnia-Herzegovina, and no one thought about it because they were focused on other things. What keeps me going and resilient is that there are really clear, achievable goals. We have to desegregate 56 high schools while we do constitutional reform. We can do two things at the same time, and those 56 high schools and desegregation is something that has been done in many countries all around the world. Yes, it takes time, but it's an achievable goal. And doing that would be a tremendous win for the country. And it's the type of work that the U.S. Institute of Peace was founded to do on behalf of the American people around the world. That, to me, gives me hope. We've got a simple goal. We can achieve it if we can get the resources behind it, and we can talk people into being on our side if we try to make that reform. And we have a track record of doing that. That's what gives me hope. Achievable, clear, specific objectives. And getting them done feels great, and finding new ones feels even better.
Thank you. Susan, please.
Yeah, two things I think drive my resilience in the work that I do. And the first one is feeling called, that calling or deep purpose. And the second one is hope. We're mentioning that, and that's in the title, that hope. I've actually been doing a lot of reading around the science of hope. And in about 3 weeks, I have one of the top hope scientists that's going to do an event for me online, and you're all welcome. But he says that hope can be taught, and hope is, like, there's three things. What you just said about you have to be able to see a better future, but having a goal. But there's two things, and when people have these two things, they can actually get there. And one is if they see a path. So if you're homeless and you see a path, and then willpower. So that hope, is there a path? With my work, there's a path. It's complex, there's a path. Do we have the willpower? I think we as a state have that willpower, and we definitely have goals. So that hope keeps me going and resilient.
Incredible. So 3 real world strategies for you to take in addition to the arsenal of information that you now have from this workshop. The stories from your communities. That's where we started this morning. Knowing where we come from, knowing our stories, knowing our heritage. The metrics. Do we have an attainable goal? Do we know how we're going to achieve that goal? Do we have, I love your vitality, Julia, the vision to never be satisfied with an accomplished goal? And Susan, bringing it back to hope. Hope, which is based in tangible things, right? These are imagining the pathway forward, the science of hope. I love that. This is unplanned, but I don't know about you. I'm about reaching my saturation level of information, of experiences, of incredible discussions we've had today. Can we just do a little exercise together right now in this moment? Pull out a piece of paper and a pencil, or your phone if you don't have anything to write with. I guess for our speakers, you'll have to use your phones or your brains. Pull something out you can write something down with or record something with. And let's actually do a resiliency exercise together. Will you select one of those three things? Either think of a story, a metric, or something that brings you hope, and imagine that path to hope. Let's just take 65 seconds to envision this thing in our minds, what's going to bring us resiliency when you walk across that door frame, out to your cars. We don't want to lose whatever you're about to imagine in your mind. Take 65 seconds to imagine that pathway, and then write down whatever of those three things comes out of that imagined pathway. Either a story, a metric, or a specific hope-related thing. Let's take 65 seconds now. Okay, let me tell you about what I just imagined in my head. I replayed today on double speed. And when I go to my work tomorrow in genocide communities, I'm going to see your faces. I'm going to see the faces of our panelists. I'm going to see the faces of the women that we've had the honor of remembering. Every time I go to a conference and I see empty chairs, I think about the women who should be here who aren't. Maybe they couldn't get here because they're in Afghanistan. Maybe they couldn't get here because they're watching their kids at home. Maybe they couldn't get here because of other barriers. That is my resiliency pathway forward. And I'm really grateful that each of you would take time out of your day to be part of that resilient pathway. I'm even more grateful if you take what you've learned today and you do something about it. So let's end with final reflections from our panelists on resiliency in the pathway forward. Feel free to share your reflections on what you imagined, or if not, any other final thoughts you'd like to add. And we'll immediately go to some final questions and answers before closing what has truly been an extraordinary day, a bellwether day, if I do say so myself. So, final thoughts. Let's start with Susan this time and work our way back across.
Just quickly, I was just imagining how much more good things we could do in the world if every woman knew that she mattered, that she had an important voice, and that she had confidence and a path that other people supported her to be able to stand up and step forward and do the work. And if we could empower all these women and good men, right, around us to do that, we could move mountains, really. Thank you.
It matters a lot to a lot of people if you tell them that you are working for the United States of America or on the behalf of the American people. Being an American is a really specific and weird thing. It is. And part of that is being very direct, way more direct than our European counterparts and friends. Part of that is thinking more about morality and justice in the world than simply many other people do. Many people around the world know the United States is a nation that was founded by religious pilgrims in search of a better life. And many people hear the United States and they expect great things. Even if they're not American, even if their country was at war with the United States, even if they are now living in the midst of a post-conflict setting, dealing with intractable, awful problems. And USIP and our team is able to do our work because of the good faith that people around the world have in the United States. The real value of our team, being as old as it is we predate the big government move to engage religion more as part of the global war on terror. That means when people are looking for an American partner, they trust us more because we don't have that baggage. We were doing religion before it was cool. Not because we thought it was just randomly important, but because we were trying to carry forward the vision, ideals, and heritage of the American people, your heritage. And that buys us opportunity to make an impact, and that gives me resilience.
I think for me is knowing for a certainty that our current situation is not the end and is not final, and knowing that we can envision a very bright future, and we can work every single day in small steps to try to find a way towards that future. So not to lose hope, someone mentioned hope, not to lose hope in our current situation, but to find strength and value, self-value, and find opportunities to work towards a future that we all deserve, and just to continue little bit by little bit to get there.
Thank you so much. Questions, final questions from the audience. I encourage you, especially if you haven't made a question yet, please, the woman in the blue shirt, can we take a mic? Or, oh, thank you so much for helping out there. Yes, the woman here, please tell us your name and your brief question.
My name is Lucy Malin. This is for Susan. Did you cooperate with the Rural Utah Project that's just been going on in trying to end the gerrymandering that prevents us from progressing outside of the Salt Lake Valley?
The Utah League of Women's Voters and the MWAG organization are some of our partners. We have a lot of partners that are doing various things, and so they're connected in theirs, but we don't, everybody's doing their piece, and we try to lift and support the work that they are doing. So that's an interesting area, an important area of work that they're doing right now.
Thank you.
Sounds like an action item. I love a good action item. Thank you for your question, comment. Next question, comment. Yes, here in the front, or, yeah, we'll go here.
Thank you so much. This question is for Julia. Julia, I so appreciate your passion and your love for the work that you do and for the Institute. I actually, several years ago, attended a mental health conference that was actually hosted there by Michigan State University, and so it's such a beautiful building in DC. You had mentioned some of the countries that the Institute is working with specifically on peace and conflict. I wanted to ask you what, if anything, is the Institute doing about the current crisis in the Middle East? Gaza right now is going to be a year, October 8th. There have been over 40,000 people that have been killed. I just read this morning on the plane, there are 15,000 kids that are going to have prosthetic legs and arms. Like, what is our nation doing that they cannot bring peace to that part of the world?
Thank you for that. I'll begin with saying our current USIP president has been asked to temporarily serve at the Department of State, leading humanitarian coordination to ensure that aid gets people that need it. safely and without interruption. That's one thing. The second thing is USIP has a team that has been working on the Israel-Palestine conflict for a very long time and is actively engaged in a lot of different conversations, specifically around the potentials for the cessation of hostilities. It is our big priority in the space right now, and I can't go into more detail on it, but it is one of our #1 goals, and it is important to every single team at the Institute that we are able to execute on that as much as we are able to. This gets back to resilience, actually, but there are some conflicts in the world that are infinitely bigger than USIP. We are a big institution, but we are about the price tag of 2 F-35 wings, about $60 million. And that is a lot of money for peace. But there's infinitely more that goes into war and conflict and into the perspectives that go into that. I would say that the other big thing the Institute does, and this is specific to the Israel-Palestine conflict, is we host a lot of discussions on how people think through and think about security. The fact is that in a lot of different discussions around security, they are echo chambers where the deep causes of conflict are not talked about in a really relevant and meaningful way. When I was in Sarajevo, I was talking to some NATO colleagues, and the way they were talking about the Houthis in Yemen felt like it was 2001 all over again. We work with our security colleagues to help them understand the realities of conflict on the ground, the complex political, social, and history that goes into it, and also the simple moral facts of the communities that are experiencing conflict. And I hope that is a good answer for you. We're working on it. We're more than aware of it. And I wish I could tell you we're going to fix it tomorrow. We won't. But we are working to fix it as much as we can every single day.